I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. It looks like the movement is pretty much slowing down in terms of folks logging in during the presentation. So I want to start out introducing myself. My name is Josh Alexander, and I'm the Regional Audit Supervisor for the Austin region. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in this afternoon and being a part of the Lunch and Learn TABC Talks edition on holiday and or private parties, as well as charitable events that are utilizing the service of alcohol during those events. The guidance today was developed to improve internal and external communications and ensure more consistent application of the TABC statutes and rules. The guidance reflects appropriate processes, requirements, and interpretations based on the general situations presented in the presentation. Obviously, the guidance may not apply in every situation, and so we encourage you to contact the local TABC office in the event that you have questions about any of the guidance provided or specific information on future events that you're a part of. I'm going to go over some general housekeeping information here. During the presentation, you may interact by using the chat feature located in the toolbar at the bottom of the presentation window. For convenience and efficiency, I'm going to wait until the conclusion of the presentation to respond and address your questions, but you will be able to submit feedback and questions during the presentation time. If you experience any technical issues while using the Zoom's presentation feature, we encourage you to visit Zoom's Help Center at https://support.zoom.us/HC. The presentation today is an attempt to address those who are not currently TABC licensed and wish to host events where they want to have alcohol available to their participants. And we want to provide clarity around what it takes to legally put on a private event or a holiday event, and then address charitable events again, that involve alcohol where, there's no permit involved. General overview, we're going to go over today some just general rules on selling alcohol, offering alcohol-free private or holiday parties, charitable, religious, or civic events, and then go over some additional items to remember in the event that you guys are wanting to host a future event where alcohol is going to be consumed. Selling alcohol versus not selling alcohol. If alcohol is sold at a party or event and there is direct contact with the consumer and the alcohol service provider and money is exchanged in return for the alcohol, then a permit is required. If alcohol is not sold at a party or event, then obviously a license or permit is not required. Where some of the confusion comes up with these types of events is whether there's paid entry or free entry or some other sort of required monetary exchange in order to access the event. You get into some of those complications, and we're going to address that today. Paid or free entry into an event with a cash bar must require that you have a permit. And so again, that equates to the sale of alcohol because there's a direct exchange of money to get the alcohol. However, a paid event that just happens to have an open bar service where alcohol is available to not only the paying customers, but customers who didn't pay may not require a permit as long as the ticket price is not directly tied to the alcohol service. Free entry into an event with an open bar, again, does not equate to selling alcohol and does not require that a permanent license be obtained. However, one thing to note is if you are requiring a purchase to get in, the event should offer alcohol to any requesting adult who is of the age of 21, of course, and not intoxicated. Also, to avoid the circumstance of selling alcohol without a permit, you must make the same alcoholic beverages available to any adult that requested, whether they paid the access ticketed price or not. If alcohol is being sold at the event, then we operate under the provisions of the Alcoholic Beverage Code in Chapter 11.01 and 61.01. 11.01 requires that a permit be obtained in order to sell liquor. And liquor is defined as distilled spirits, wine, ale, and malt beverages above 4% alcohol in weight. A license is required under 61.01 in order to sell beer, which are going to be your malt beverage products below 4% alcohol by weight. If alcohol is going to be donated at any of your events by an industry member, then it cannot be sold with the exception of a temporary auction permit, which you can find in Chapter 53 of the Alcoholic Beverage Code. And I won't go over the details today in this presentation, but I wanted to provide the chapter on temporary auction permits for your convenience. But donated alcohol must be picked up from the donating industry member whenever the event doesn't have a permit, and the alcohol has to be served by event representatives. The donating industry member may not be present in official capacity to promote the products or help facilitate the service of the alcoholic beverages. The context of this presentation: private parties and events involving alcohol consumption that take place on an unlicensed premise where attendees obtain access through private invitation or otherwise is how we define private parties. And a private party could also be a holiday party. And so holiday parties can be considered private in nature, but also some private or holiday parties can be public in nature as well. Examples of holiday parties include your typical Halloween parties, Christmas parties, New Year's Eve parties, but it can even be weddings or house parties, things of that nature, where you're going to have some sort of a guest list or offering to the public, depending on whether, again, it's private or public. But if the ability to buy alcohol at those events exists, then a permit or license is required to sell it. And this applies to, whether there's a ticketed entry or whether there's a requirement to make a donation to the event. If that's required in order to get the alcohol, then the interpretation is still that there must be a permit to sell it there. If alcohol is provided free to any requesting adult, then as we've mentioned before, no permit is required. Parties involving donated alcohol, again, cannot be sold, and the donating member must not be present to promote or serve the product. An example of a holiday party is an unlicensed event where they have New Year's Eve parties, and we get a lot of those throughout the state, where the event organizers require some sort of paid entry to get into the event. They go out and obtain donated alcohol from various industry members. And so the event is unlicensed, so the alcohol obviously has to be made available to any requesting adult who's not intoxicated, and the alcohol must be picked up. The provisions in Chapter 11.06 and 61.06 require that activities under the code be conducted on a licensed premise only, which is where we get the interpretation that the manufacturers or wholesale tier members who donate alcohol for these kind of events cannot be present in official capacity conducting business authorized under their permit. One of the other things I want to point out at these types of events, holiday parties or New Year's Eve parties that require payment, is when the organizers develop a sort of a tier system in payment in terms of having VIP paid guests and general admissions paid guests. The one thing I want to point out, because these events are not licensed or permitted, they're considered to be free events, and therefore a VIP paying member who has to pay a premium price for the alcohol cannot have access to premium alcohol because of the premium payment. And so in order to be classified as a truly free event, whether I paid a general admissions or whether I didn't pay a ticket at all, or whether I paid a premium price for VIP, we all should have access to the same alcohol because there's no permit being utilized in that scenario, which authorizes the sale of alcohol. Let's get into charitable, religious, and civic events. A charitable, religious, or civic event, in many cases, are events that raise money for the benefit of some nonprofit or charitable organization. We have created a marketing practice bulletin that you can find on the TABC website, and that number is Marketing Practices Bulletin 26, which covers 3 options for serving alcohol at a charitable, religious, or civic event. And I've included the link to the bulletin here in the PowerPoint for your convenience. But we're going to talk a little bit more about the 3 options that the bulletin provides as guidance for these types of events here in the following slides. Option 1. A charitable, religious, or civic organization may put on an event and offer free alcohol to its customers and may serve donated alcohol at these events. They may also obtain alcohol from any other lawful source, such as convenience stores or the nearest package store, so long as there's no payment required to access the alcohol. Under this scenario, the charitable organization may also enter into sponsorship agreements with alcohol industry members for the use of advertisement, signage, and product exclusivity. But again, under this scenario, the event is not permitted, and so there's no regulation that enforces how the sponsorship agreements read. In option 2, the charitable or religious organization actually obtains a permit which authorizes them to sell tickets and or directly sell alcohol at those events. However, the charity under this scenario becomes a retail license or permit holder and becomes subject to many of the restrictions in the Alcoholic Beverage Code on the three-tier system and relationships that may be unlawful between a retailer and a upper tier member. The alcohol can legally be sold under this scenario, but the religious organization may not enter into sponsorship agreements for signage, equipment, advertising, etc., because of the fact that they've now become a licensed retailer for that event. The only exception, because of their status of being a nonprofit, is that they may accept cash donations from the alcoholic beverage industry, provided that there are no strings attached. The final option, option 3, in Bulletin 26, is probably the more common option that is selected by most nonprofits for these events. And it involves the nonprofit seeking the assistance of a third-party authorized retailer or some other charity who's authorized to pull a temporary permit at these events, allowing them to sell the alcohol and make the charity of the event an independent party to the alcohol sale. And under this scenario, the charity can engage in sponsorship agreements with the industry members. They're not allowed to accept donated alcohol because alcohol can't be sold under this scenario due to the fact that the third party obtained a permit and the event is now a licensed or permitted event. And you can't sell donated alcohol at a licensed or permitted event. But the charity may receive cash or in-kind donations from industry members, as well as equipment, as long as that agreement for the use of that equipment and signage occurs between the donating member and the actual charity. And the actual concessionaire or entity that pulls the permit has to be completely independent of that sponsorship agreement. Also, and most importantly, the concessionaire or retail permittee at that location must retain the right to control the quantity, price, and selection of the brands at that event. Other things to remember before engaging in any of these types of events is, you need to check with your local ordinances and local authorities there to make sure that there isn't a local ordinance that would prevent certain activities from occurring. Also, you want to make sure that alcohol is not served to minors or intoxicated persons, and consider requiring any service staff at the event to hold the seller server certification. And this is recommended whether you're having a free event where there's no permit required or whether you're selling alcohol, because it's simply just ideal to have educated service staff to be able to make responsible decisions on how the alcohol should be sold or served at the event. And then lastly, you always want to encourage responsible alcohol consumption by the guest. In summary, we've addressed the fact that private functions with no entry fee or cash bar do not require a permit. Private functions with an entry fee may not necessarily require a permit, so long as any responsible adult may request and receive an alcoholic beverage without having to pay the entry fee. We've gone over the Marketing Practice Bulletin 26, which you can find on the TABC website. which addresses the 3 options available to a charitable organization or religious organization that would like to provide alcohol at those events. And again, in summary, the nonprofit or charitable organization can give that alcohol away free, where there's no permit required. They may obtain a permit of their own, which authorizes them to sell the alcohol, or they may get assistance from a authorized retailer or another charity to pull a temporary permit, which makes their activity at the actual event independent of that person who holds the permit. And so those are the 3 options under 026. And then lastly, consider any local ordinances that may exist in your areas. Don't serve, sell to intoxicated people or minors, and always encourage responsible alcohol consumption. At this time, if there were any questions left during the presentation, I'm going to address those questions now. You may also, if you haven't done so already, interact through the chat feature of the video conference to ask questions at this time. And once we go over the questions, just to note, if for some reason you think of additional questions, then you can always send questions to or feedback to stakeholder@tabc.texas.gov. Let's see if we have any questions for today. And it doesn't look like we have any questions. Again, if you think of questions after this, feel free to send us an email at that or to the email box stakeholder@tabc.texas.gov. We'd like to thank you all for watching. One of the other recommendations for today is that we'd like for you guys to send us feedback on the TABC Talks presentation, and any other questions that you have, as well as if you have any suggestions for improvement moving forward. We'd like to hear those too. And so immediately following the presentation, there should be a short survey that's sent out to each of you. We really encourage you to provide feedback on the presentation so that I myself and the agency can make improvements as you all see fit. Again, I appreciate you guys watching, and thank you.